Hey guys, welcome back to YPW, the home of all things professional wrestling. Make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to the channel. If you're already subscribed to the channel, make sure you turn on notifications as we are releasing new videos. From their conception to how they changed the industry, to how they brought down WCW and their introduction to the Hall of Fame, join me as I tell you the story of New World Order. At one point in time, the idea of factions in wrestling was kind of superfluous. Tag teams were fine because that was a style of wrestling, but factions were a different story. Then the rise of groups like the Von Erichs, the Four Horsemen, the Fabulous Freebirds, and more. The need of true factions to help build up brands became an important thing, but in the world of WCW, the nWo was the faction for better or for worse, and it both made the brand and broke it. Let's rewind the clock, shall we? In the 80s of wrestling, things had started to change for the better and for the worse. The rise of wrestling as a mainstream sport had begun in a big way, mainly because of the rise of WWE via Vince McMahon Jr. He had started to buy up many territories and assert WWF, later turned WWE, as the dominant brand in the industry. This was further helped with the rise of WrestleMania, their major event, and by 1987, they had their legendary WrestleMania 3 event, where Hulk Hogan faced Andre the Giant in one of the most important matches in wrestling history. But not all the territories were willing to go and bow down to WWF. Some still existed, and more importantly than that, some were wrestling to fight against McMahon and his brand. Enter World Championship Wrestling, aka WCW. They were officially born in 1988, not in the 90s like many people claim or remember. Ted Turner bought the brand and used various wrestling stars of the 80s to help propel the brand to something even more than expected. However, they weren't mainstream, not yet, not in the way they would be. In 1993, they hired Eric Bischoff, one of the most famous men in wrestling because of his ties with WCW and WWE, to be their executive producer of the brand and help them get to an even higher level, which he did. In the late 90s, WCW was a name and had many shows and live events via pay-per-view that helped make them even more famous. But in terms of fighting against WWF, they weren't a name. But then Bischoff came up with an idea that would change the game forever. The nWo storyline was an idea created by Bischoff, whose inspiration for the angle came after attending New Japan Pro Wrestling's Battle Formation show at the Tokyo Dome on April 29, 1996. The show was headlined by NJPW versus UWFI match for the IWGP Heavyweight Championship, as New Japan's Shinya Hashimoto defeated UWFI's Nobuhiko Takada. Bischoff wanted to do an invasion-type angle where WCW was being sabotaged by another wrestling group, initially insinuated as being the WWF, since the nWo's founding members had previously wrestled for the company. The nWo was originally portrayed as a separate entity from WCW. Often propaganda-style vignettes and product commercials concerning the nWo were presented in the style of a broadcast signal intrusion, with a voice proclaiming, quote, "The following announcement has been paid for by the New World Order," end quote. Others such as Kevin Nash, television director Craig Leathers, Chief WCW Booker Terry Taylor, and Taylor's assistant Kevin Sullivan and Paul Orndorff all contributed their own ideas to the nWo concept. On May 19, 1996, Kevin Nash and Scott Hall wrestled their final matches for the WWF as Diesel and Razor Ramon respectively, as they both had opted to sign with rival WCW instead of staying with the promotion. 8 days later, on May 27th, Hall appeared on Nitro, which emanated from the Macon Coliseum in Macon, Georgia. As the Mauler and Steve Dahl wrestled, Hall emerged from the crowd and entered the ring, bringing the match to a halt and called for the ring announcer's microphone. "Y'all know who I am," Hall said to the stunned crowd, "but you don't know why I'm here." He went on to deliver what became known as the "You Want a War" speech, stating that he and unnamed allies had a challenge for WCW Executive Vice President Eric Bischoff and any WCW wrestlers. As the episode neared its end, Hall accosted Bischoff, who was also the lead broadcaster for Nitro at the time, in the broadcast booth and demanded that he tell WCW owner Ted Turner, who he referred to as Billionaire Ted, to pick 3 of his best wrestlers for a war. The next week, Hall claimed to have a big surprise for fellow professional wrestler Sting. On the following Nitro, the big surprise was revealed to be Kevin Nash. They were dubbed the Outsiders, randomly appearing at WCW events to cause trouble and inevitably be let out of the building by WCW security. Despite the fact that Hall and Nash were both fully employed by WCW, the storyline's implication that they were WWF wrestlers invading WCW was enough of a concern to the WWF that it considered legal action over Hall and Nash's antics. Hall was the bigger concern to the WWF, as he had not fully distanced himself from his Razor Ramon character, continuing to act like Razor and speaking with Razor's pseudo-Cuban American accent. WWF/WWE would try and sue them for this, but nothing came of it because of the nature of the contracts and the business. Anyway, the true birth of the nWo came at the event known as Bash at the Beach. It was supposed to be a 6-man tag match, but it quickly devolved into a tag team match until things got squirrely and craziness ensued. But the one thing no one saw coming was when Hulk Hogan, who hadn't been on WCW in a while, came to the ring and chased away the Outsiders, or so we thought. For not long afterwards, he beat up former ally, Randy Savage, prompting a stunned crowd and the Outsiders to return to the ring and celebrate. Hulk Hogan was a heel, something he had never been in WWF, and in fact hadn't been since he was in the AWA. After the match, Mean Gene Okerlund came to the ring and interviewed Hogan. During the interview, Hogan exclaimed that he, Hall, and Nash were the New World Order of wrestling, giving the group its name, the New World Order. Hogan's reasoning for the heel turn and the destruction of classic WCW talent like Luger and Sting was simple. He was bored. He claimed that billionaire Ted, aka Ted Turner, had made him all sorts of promises, but it wasn't enough, and that Hall and Nash were the kind of people that would help light the fire of WCW and bring a new reign to wrestling, even challenging the Company Up North, a reference to WWF. As the nWo started to rise in popularity, things started to shift in their favor. Hogan, who now went by the name Hollywood Hulk Hogan, who won the WCW World title from the Giant in the pay-per-view after their debut, and re-christened it the nWo World Heavyweight title, even spray painting it to prove that it was theirs. Then, the nWo grew in ranks as Ted DiBiase came to WCW as the group's financer and spokesperson, and the Giant, whom Hogan had beaten for the belt, showed up as well to join the group. The storyline that came from this was WCW versus nWo, and the seeds of doubt began to creep throughout the entire locker room, including stalwart hero Sting, who was accused of being with the nWo multiple times despite this being true. This would lead to a major shift in power as Sting declared himself a free agent, and for the next 15 months would transform from the Surfer Sting to the Crow version of Sting that most fans know him as. But during this 15 months, the nWo continued to grow, including getting Sean Waltman, formerly 123 Kid, now called Six, as the 6th member of the group, and arguably one of the most famous of the group. Then they got their own personal head of security, their own special referee to do matches for them, and even Miss Elizabeth as part of the group. Another major move came when Eric Bischoff himself revealed that he had secretly been with the nWo the whole time, and went from broadcaster to an egomaniacal ruler of WCW and demanded that the entire WCW locker room join the nWo, or else. Including some Japanese wrestlers who came and made nWo Japan, who went and wrestled as part of New Japan Pro Wrestling. What was to follow was many years of surprises, twists and turns, arrivals of legendary figures like Bret the Hitman Hart, Warrior, and the darker version of Sting. Even Dennis Rodman came into the picture to be part of the nWo for a time. But that's when things started to fall apart, and by that we mean both the kayfabe and non-kayfabe way. For at this time, WWF and WCW had begun the Monday Night Wars, and as a result, the nWo storyline was more important than ever. And as WWF started to set up their game, WCW had to do the same. At times, they did well, including getting the world title off of Hogan and onto people like Goldberg and Diamond Dallas Page, among others. And they were still getting key defectors like Bret Hart from WWF. The problem, though, was that they were running out of ideas, and it showed. While the early to mid-90s had some of the best WCW content around, the later part of the 90s were shown to be some of the worst content WCW had ever put out. This was proven by the nWo, who had grown so big and bloated that they had to defect to certain other various groups that all touted the nWo name. And even when the main group returned to right the ship, injuries prevented them from being at full power. What's worse, because of the struggles of WCW at this time, many of the nWo, including Waltman, who went back to WWF as part of D-Generation X as X-Pac, left the company entirely, and others just weren't happy with how they were being treated. Eventually, the fall of the nWo as a group led to the fall of WCW. WWE had been born via rebranding, and they all but literally bought out WCW, doing a fake invasion angle of their own to help sell the fact that the two brands were now one. Eventually, Vince McMahon would bring in Hogan, Hall, and Nash to be the nWo once more, but as a part of WWE. Due to this, the now legendary feud between Hulk Hogan and The Rock happened at WrestleMania, and the nWo would grow and shrink over the next year or so as a result. Eventually, though, Vince McMahon would go and disband the nWo for good in an attempt to start a new era of WWE, including bringing in Eric Bischoff as the general manager of Raw. The various members of the nWo were a part of WWE in their own way. Hogan had various runs over the years, same with Kevin Nash. Hall and Waltman fell out with the company due to substance abuse issues. And the only time the nWo really got back together was for cameo spots or interference in certain matches. However, in 2019, it was revealed to the world that Hogan, Hall, Nash, and Waltman would be inducted into the Hall of Fame as the four main staples of the nWo. In truth, the nWo was one of the main reasons why the Monday Night Wars happened, and the group did indeed help birth many careers. But when it got too big, it crumpled. And that is a lesson many wrestling promotions have learned over the years. To try and mimic the success of the nWo without getting too over the top with it. And when they do that, it's too sweet. So what do you think? What do you think of the story of the nWo? Can you believe the rise in fame that the group had over the years? Do you think that the nWo will ever see a true successor again? Let me know in the comments below. And thank you for watching YPW, the channel dedicated to all things wrestling. If you like this video, make sure to check out some of our other videos and to be notified when we release new videos. Make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Until next time.